Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy podcast. My name is Wanaka Overhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Liam Joel Russell. Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy.
Thank you for this holy encounter. Thank you for your wonderful invitation, and also all of the help that you've given me in the run up to today with organising tech and just making it a very smooth and pleasant and assisted journey. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And I'd like to start with the question that I like to ask first-time guests is, how did you come to see the world the way you do today?
And that is a beautiful question. I've certainly come on a number of the journeys of your podcasts, and I think that's a inspired starting point, and it just opens up the floor in such a beautiful way, because it is a very specific question, but it's got a great malleability to it in terms of allowing the interpretation of that question to give you the freedom to feel comfortable to kind of like allow yourself to feel like you're not restricted in your answer. So I can sense that already. It's a beautiful question, and thank you. And it's been a journey of necessity. One thing that comes to mind straight away is a spiritual teacher that I like was talking about his own experience after many years and saying that he noticed that about 90% of people come to the spiritual path and the spiritual practice as a consequence of suffering, and only 10% of people come out of like an inquiry, just a sense of intrigue. And I definitely put myself in the 90%. I think there was a need to remove interference to the awareness of love's presence. Peace was not a default setting for me. Starting off very early on in childhood, like probably even before 5 years old, there was a lot of difficulties which made the situation very challenging, and that became the norm. So by the time I got to an inquisitive age of around 14, 15 years old, which was kind of like reflective in as much as I felt I'd already had a relationship with my maybe my inner teacher, as well as my ego certainly had centre stage and had hold of the reins, but I definitely had this unarticulated sense that I was listening to my thoughts, and I was listening to my inner monologue in a way where it reached a point where I had to stop and say to myself, what and who are you listening to? What's going on here? So the internal journey started unconsciously. It just developed on its own. And that reached a point where I then thought, what is happening? And that initiated a conscious external inquiry via books, systems of study, other people who had the interest and were further down the road, and to try and almost kind of like put together a picture as to what it was that I was experiencing. But it was very much rooted still in the ego being the dominant force. And that was completely understandable as I reflect back on that. I can totally see why that teenage version of myself was completely conditioned and used to hearing the voice of fear, because there'd been so many things that had happened which were extremely terrifying, which fear was just the default setting. And I started to look through a number of different spiritual systems, and I remember there was always this repeating experience of opening a book, being interested in a system, whether it's an orthodox religion or whether it's something a little bit more niche. And then when it got to that wonderful little phrase where it basically sort of says, if you don't follow what we're doing, then you're not getting in. This is the one way into heaven. No one else is going to be allowed. And I just couldn't sit with that. I just think, this is wrong. You know, how can there be one tiny little group who get it right and everybody else gets it wrong? So I used to close a book, move on. And then I moved house. I'd been living in my family house, and I moved up the road, the same road, from number 25 to number 44. And little did I know that that tiny little move was going to open up my world in a completely incomprehensible way, because my new neighbour had a copy of a certain book which I found to be absolutely fascinating and intriguing. And I borrowed it off of him, and I obviously kept the book for too long, because one day he knocked on my door and he had a brand new copy under his arm, and he said, "I've bought this for you." And this was the 9th of September 1993, because it's still written inside cover. And he wanted his copy back, and he gave me my own copy. And the main thing that hit me first of all was to have this voice of fear explained to me in a way that I didn't need to take ownership of it, in terms of it being my true identity. And it was just a program that was running in my mind as a consequence of the human experience, and the consequence of not necessarily being old enough to put together the pieces of what was going on. So it was just absolutely incredibly freeing to have that dichotomy between my true identity and the voice of fear. And then obviously getting to learn about the Holy Spirit in theory before I could then get to learn to quieten the voice of the ego, to hear the Holy Spirit, for it to have a platform in my life, because, like I said, the ego dominated everything. So there was obviously then, I was going to have to get to know this new friend that I hadn't been able to spend any time with in my mind, because this other voice had just been shouting and screaming and all the rest of it for well over a decade. So I was probably like about 20 years old when that happened, and I find it quite interesting, to look back and think, what did a 20-year-old version of me actually grasp and get his head around in this incredible book? Because we know that that lovely phrase, I think Judy might have come up with the origin when she said, it meets you where you are. And, so many of us have experienced that we've had this book for however long, however many years, and then we come back to something we know we've read once, twice, 3, 5, 10 times, and it presents itself to us in a completely different way to how it has ever presented itself before. And the words on the page haven't changed. What's changed is our perception. And I'm a musician, and I'll often give people the example of music from my personal history. And that would be the album I tend to use as an explanation is Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. So this album came into my life as a young musician, probably 15, 16 years old. And then I would have had an impression from it, which I can still remember, which was almost like, I think the very first time I listened to it, I had the headphones on. I remember having to stop and take the headphones off and go, is this real? Am I imagining this music? Because it's just so perfect for my taste, and the construct of it and the way one song segues into the next. I literally wasn't sure if I'd fallen asleep and was imagining it. So even at 16 years old, this album hit me like in full force of all of its brilliance. And then if I said I revisited that album 10 years later, and now I've spent 10 years studying music, next time I come back to that album, not only is it everything it was when I was 16, now because my understanding of music has grown, I can zoom in on the details and I could say, wow, listen to the keyboards in that chorus. I've never noticed that before. Listen to the vocal harmonies there. I've never heard that before. Listen to the string section on the outro of that song. Never heard that before. Jump ahead another 10 years, come back to the music. Oh my lord, listen to that. They're using an augmented ninth chord over a minor fifth. That harmony's a third over a seventh. Dark Side of the Moon's still the same piece of creativity that it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. What's changed is my capacity for it to meet me where I now am. And that's my experience with the course. And that means that every single day when I open the course and have a look whilst I'm eating my breakfast and think, oh, what's going to present itself to me today? I've never been bored with anything I've read. I feel like I've never reached the parameters. I've never got to a point where I'm like, yeah, go on then, you know. It's always meets me where I am, but it's still got this expansive potential for me to never find the border of it. It's like the universe expanding, and we say, what's the universe expanding into? Because, you know, how does that work? And it's kind of like that with the course, you know, you come to it, it meets you where you are, but it can expand to encourage you to expand. And I think that's really beautiful, because Ken Wapnick, as we know, incredible teacher of the course, was so lucky that he understood it in the way that he did. And yet two of the main things that he said when he was asked about the course, which he actually distilled down to the most purest kind of liquid from the whole process, was, we know that he said, be kind, and then he also said, go deeper. And those two things together are what I like about it. It's like, you know, it'd be very easy to be dismissive and throw that away and to just think, really, what, that's it, you know, all of that teaching and learning, and the way that he had such a clear handle on the material, and all you got for me is be kind and go deeper, you know, because the ego wants something very complex. It wants to inflate itself with this sense that it's got huge amounts of intelligence, and it probably wanted Ken to come back with some very, very convoluted and circuitous paragraph of reflection, which it could turn over in its mind and sort of think, right, okay, right, you know, and pull that left, right, up and down. So for it to actually just be as powerful and simple as be kind and go deeper, I think really just shows the class of that man and the way that he did understand it. And be kind is obviously when we're moving from the theoretical study of what's on those pages to put it into practice by developing our relationship with the inner teacher of the Holy Spirit. And the go deeper is simply just keeping your foot on the gas, you know, to never become complacent with a sense that you've already got it. You've got it all in your back pocket and you've sussed it. So the course is always going to stay one step ahead of you because it's so deep, and you can always go deeper. But the actual essence of it is what he said: just be kind. And you know, I don't think really, from my point of view, those things have been things that I've had to work on, because kindness is something that I learned firsthand from my mum. For my whole life, she is literally the person, if you wanted to use the platitudes, like they'd give you the shirt off their back. That is my mum. You know, I know she would do that to a stranger. So I've had that wonderful teacher right up close for my entire life, and kindness is a beautiful thing to be in touch with and to express. So that is something that I enjoy without being conscious about it. It just sort of comes in my experience. And then to go deeper again, I would suggest that my leanings towards being a musician, and prior to finding music, to being interested in spirituality and being interested in all the organized religions and the ancient systems of the non-duality of the Tao, and the Upanishads and the Gita and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and what the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky, all of that stuff, you know, it fascinated me. So I think that gives me this, again, familiarity with the desire to expand. But what you know as a musician is, say, for example, in the first year of learning to play an instrument, you could say your learning curve was almost like 45 degrees, because there's so much to take in, there's so much at your disposal, there's such a huge margin for growth, that very, very steep curve is natural. And then maybe after 20 or 30 years of being a musician, it's very, very small increments. You know, they're small gains because just of the nature of the journey, really, of your fluency and your familiarity with what it is that you're doing. And I think there's an aspect to that again with the spiritual studies. You know, you have this huge drive and you've got this appetite to take everything in. And then a word that I use a lot, and it's become really important to me in my explanations to people about A Course in Miracles, and that explanation is a product of my own inquiry into the material, is the scientific term reductionism. And that's something for me with A Course in Miracles which has been the end, or say end product, the current product, should we say, because I'm not at the end, but it's a current byproduct of my study, in as much as I'd like to, you know, say the course meets you where you are, and then Ken's reduced it down to be kind, go deeper. And then in my experience, in order to not end up just a permanent bookworm and having my nose in an instruction manual, I need to reduce that down to a simple understanding, whereby when it says forget this world, forget this course, then I can actually live that knowledge. And we know that Ken said to us, you know, treat the course like you're reading a giant poem. And the reason he said that wasn't in a way where you have some sort of meter in your mind. It's more like, it's very similar actually. Now what I think of is how I tried to express to you what your starting question for your podcast. It's very similar to that. It's that free kind of, it's specific, but it's very open to interpretation. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So to read the course like a giant poem enables you to instill in your own thinking the right words, the right kind of instruction for yourself, so that when you go deeper and when it meets you where you are, as you continue to go deeper, you won't get caught in reading it, cross-referencing it like an instruction booklet. So therefore, when you get something where, God will take the final step, God hasn't got any feet, take God's hand, God weeps at the thought, that's the literal stuff that you could get caught in, the language of duality. There's a phrase somewhere that I've incorporated into my vocabulary where it says you can use the language of duality without believing it. And I think that's very pertinent to this aspect of reading the Course like a giant poem. So you're just allowing it to create pictures, to have its own rhythm and movement, and to have a fluidity about it where you're not creating this rigid framework. If I was reading an instruction manual and on page 2 it said to me, use a flathead screwdriver and put 3 screws in, and then when I got to page 7 it said use a Phillips screwdriver and put 4 screws in, I'm going to go back to page 3 and page 7. I'm going to be looking at the two going, well, this doesn't match up, because I'm approaching it like it's an instruction manual, and I'm almost projecting onto it that meaning that I've learned through prior experience and the experience of other people, that this is an instruction manual. So for Ken to tell us to approach the material like it is a giant poem, that gives us the freedom, in like I say, in the same way that your opening question gives someone the freedom to answer it specifically but generally. And again, with the framework of allowing the material to come to you like a poem, for you to come to it like a poem, you're also able to then journey with it in the same way that Helen journeyed with this voice. Helen was a very sharp-minded person. We know from her qualifications, we know from her inner struggles with her love for God and her love for Jesus, that she had a very sharp mind. But she had like a new dialogue with this voice, which progressed. The conversation progressed. And again, that's why you're going to get what appears to be like more dualistic language in the early chapters. I don't find it as jarring as some people, but I know some people will say, the first 4 or 5 chapters are a bit clunky. They feel like it hasn't really got going and gotten into the flow, because essentially we're party to a conversation between Helen and the voice, or the voice predominantly speaking to Helen. Helen's not so much speaking back to the voice, but she's still absorbing that information, and it develops. By the time we get to the last chapter, that some of the stuff, it's rightfully just blossoming by then, but on that journey, there is a lot of 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, in terms of the use of language and symbolism. So to be able to allow it to be like a poem, to put that seed in your mind, treat it like you're reading a giant poem, that frees you from this cross-referencing business where you'd be going, hold on a minute, God speaks, and there's God's plan. A plan? How can God have a plan? But it's symbolism. We're using the language of duality without believing in it. We're painting pictures in an abstract way that other people can grasp, and that's why essentially we've got 365 lessons which pretty much say the same thing. And I'll often say to people that in your intellect, you would think that the further into that workbook, the deeper and the deeper and the deeper and the deeper you go. And this is interesting that I should bring this up whilst having spoken about Ken saying go deeper. Because if you think of it in a linear sense, I'll often say to people, imagine you're standing on the shoreline, on the beach, and you're about to walk into the water. And as you walk into the water, you expect the landmass to dip away and for the water to get deeper. If you take that principle to the workbook, that's kind of like, the voice's really intelligent cheat code to not alarm the ego on day one when you find yourself saying, nothing I see means anything. Because that statement is absolutely deeply profound. It's an incredible admission to be able to inhabit those words with the correct sentiment and intention. And yet again, it'll say you don't even need to believe the lessons, just give them a go. So although I'm saying to instill that exact energy that was intended to be instilled in those words, it doesn't rely on that. It's going to work anyway. But that, that statement, that very first lesson, when you actually stop and think about it after you have been all through the material and you come back to it, and I think maybe I benefited from that, because I'd been a text student. So because I got the course at 20 years old, I remember starting the workbook at 21 years old, getting so far into it, and then some of the lessons started to say, like, if you're doing this right, you should now start to see like a light around everything, and there should be a bit of a glow. I remember just being that young version of myself and just thinking, well, I mustn't be doing it right because I'm not seeing that. And it didn't give me the impetus to carry on with the workbook. But what I did do was just read the text and read the text and read the text, and not necessarily over time in a linear way. Sometimes I'd just open up the book wherever it opened and presented and read it and underline it and asterisk it and put this and bend the page and blah, blah, blah. So when I came to the workbook, I had this sense that I wanted to create like a parity and bring it up in line with how I felt I'd invested in the text. So I did the workbook for maybe like 3 or 4 years on the trot. And the teacher that helped me through initially, I think she, where she's at now, but I think she'd done it like 23, 24 years every single year. So I was given like the perfect teacher to start with. And that helped me to revisit these lessons, like I'm explaining, when you do come back to lesson number 1, but you've done the whole workbook and you see it afresh. Or you do come back to Dark Side of the Moon when you've been playing music for 35 years and you see it afresh. You do open the Course in Miracles and it meets you where you are. And, what I'll say about the workbook to people sometimes is, imagine you're standing in a museum and there's a statue, and there's 365 points around that statue where you can stand and look at the same statue with different light and different angles. And I might find at point 7 around that statue, that's my sweet spot where I just completely connect with it and I'm one with it. For you, yours might be number 113. Somebody else, it might be 342. But in those 365 vantage points around this one thought, this one central thought presented to us of surrender. And again, what an incredible aspect of the Course, the word surrender does not appear in the Course in Miracles once, yet the whole book is about surrender, but the type of surrender where you're not giving up anything, you're not waving a white flag, you're dropping to your knees in grace and gratitude. And for anybody who's had that beautiful experience, like a revelationary moment or an awakening or glimpses behind the veil, what comes with it is just, the tears are so beautiful, because the tears are like the relief that you were wrong. The surrender is like, it's like the relief it's like, oh my God, of course, this is so much better and so much more than I could ever have imagined with my the limitations on my conscious awareness. And we know nowadays we've got these beautiful metaphors that weren't available before in the past, such as the virtual reality headset. It's a very, very helpful descriptive tool to talk to people about the notion of what's going on, what are our capacity to see the extent of where we actually are. We've got a virtual reality headset on, and we think it's the entirety of everything, and yet we've got this voice tapping us on the shoulder via A Course in Miracles going, "Wait, take your visor off," and you take it off, and it's like, it's so much more than you could have ever envisaged, because you were limited, you were restricted to the perceptive capacities of a human experience. And we know that anyway from our discoveries in the sciences and biology and stuff, the spectrum of lights. There's certain birds. We have a bird in England, I think they're international, called a starling, and it would be very easy for someone to think that a starling was quite a mundane and dull, uninteresting looking bird. And then when they've worked out the field of vision that the starlings have themselves, that goes into the ultraviolet range, and this is the same of lots of species of birds, they appear to one another just like glittering, shining, angelic beings, because we've got this tiny little bandwidth of visual capacity, and the birds have got a bigger one than us, And we know that from hearing, we know that from sight, we know that it's kind of like the script itself, the mechanics of the human condition are the script itself, the way we speak to ourselves in developing in society, sci-fi movies, things like that, this conversation that we're having with ourselves, this sort of self-prophesizing unraveling of us awakening from a dream. And I think awakening, again, it's nice that that's appeared now in the talking, because it's really good to take all of the grandiosity and the pomposity out of this word awakening, and to just take it right down to the most simplest kind of interpretation, and just think of awakening. You woke up in the morning and you awoke. It's a very, very accessible and ordinary experience, and it needs to be kept, in my opinion, in that framework. It needs to allow everybody to feel that it's something that is equally graspable for them as it is for their neighbour and their brother, because otherwise it's an ego trap. It's going to be a wholly ego scenario to say, oh, I'm awakened, and it's like, well, we need to keep that right down to this level where anybody and everybody will be awakened in their own time. There's no hierarchy to illusions. It's just going to happen when it's meant to happen at exactly the right time. Your passage through time and space is not at random, as we're told in the Course. And again, how amazing that we have this thing called dreams. We actually have sleep. If we had a human condition where none of us ever slept during our entire lives, and where our mind didn't travel to another realm where we inhabited that dreamscape with characters that we projected meaning onto, we wouldn't have this incredible descriptive tool to talk to one another with the language of duality, where I can say to you, it's like a dream, and you know exactly what I mean, because we experience sleep and we experience dreams. And again, that kind of subplot written into the script of our human condition reflects the larger picture. And why would it not? This goes back to like Carl Jung talking about everybody in your dream is you, and you've just personified a thought. And if I was having a dream and I needed to have this conversation with myself subconsciously in my sleep, and I needed there to be a strict, stern voice in that dream, then I'm probably going to go through my memory banks and pull out a teacher from at school when I was a kid who was very strict and put him in my dream, and if I'm having a lovely time in this dream, then I'll pick somewhere from my life where I've had a nice day and put together this storyline based upon the experiences that you've had in order to have this conversation with yourself whilst you're asleep. And that is very much the bigger picture again. And with our experience in the world explained to us as though we are a dreamer of a dream, and we have to realize that we're not the dream figure in the dream, but we are the dreamer of the dream. One of the big traps of that, in terms of what perpetuates and gives an intensity to our experience, is what beautifully gets explained to us in the course as projection. And we know that projection is judgment. They're the same thing. And in projecting a judgment, projecting meaning onto something by judging it, is an obscuration of what is actually there. And yet it's become this most natural thing from an experience where the ego dominates, or where the ego has a very present foothold in your existence, that you're going to project judgment onto stuff. And again, the ego's not going to want you to surrender those judgments, but they actually do, they do obscure reality, as we know. And with A Course in Miracles, so many words that we're familiar with, but they have been redefined, they've been presented to us in a way that we've almost got no past history of. We have to meet them where we are today. And forgiveness, as it had to, when they had to bring out the Song of Prayer pamphlet, because people already very early on started to misinterpret the symbols, and then the Song of Prayer pamphlet talked about forgiveness to destroy, which basically helped us to understand that that was the world's model of forgiveness, where I'd say, Wanako, you said you were going to come to my house at 2:00 on Wednesday and you didn't show up, so I'm going to forgive you for that. I'm going to tell you that I've forgotten, but actually I've got that written down on a little piece of paper tucked away just in case I ever need to pull it out again and go, guilty, this nonsense. So forgiveness, in terms of A Course in Miracles, in terms of this journey with the material, meeting you where you are all the time, going deeper whilst reducing it. My favourite workbook lesson, I think it's lesson 41, God goes with me wherever I go. Whenever I hear that, my cheeks go up, it just absolutely fills me up. So I've been able to reduce that 365 lessons to one lesson for me, So this reductionism is going on because, as it says in the Course, forget this Course, live it, bring it to the table. We are the light of the world, and we have to increase the intensity of the light. We don't have to increase the intensity because it's already at a full 100 watts. It's the interference that we believe in which seems to enshroud it. But on that road to reducing everything, to going deeper, to being kinder, to not judging, then we come to this beautiful model of forgiveness that A Course in Miracles presents us with. It shows us that forgiveness to destroy is the world's interpretation of forgiveness. But from A Course in Miracles perspective, what forgiveness is a complete passive inactivity. It is the surrender that we've been talking about this evening. It is the kindness. It is going deeper. It's reducing all the chatter down to a simple state. And that state is to sit, wait, quietly do nothing, not seek to twist reality into appearances that you like. This is a completely passive inactivity. It's allowing, it's not transmitting resistance. And in that act of letting everything be, I will let everything be exactly as it is. And we don't project a meaning to obscure reality. Then we can see the truth of what is in front of us in that holy instant where we haven't judged. Then we can see the face of Christ on someone. And if that someone's the same as you, they show you your face. And in that holy instant that you experience that, there is no dimensions. You're not aware of the body. You're not aware of time and space. You're not aware of the past and the future. Because all of those concepts are not present in that moment. And that moment is a form of understanding. It's a form of it's an abstract experience, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. It's not about a geographical location. There's no ticks on a list to say things need to be present in this moment. It's quite the opposite. It's just a pure abstraction where you are lifted out of the apparent framework of linear time and space. And you forget the body of the other person. You surrender all of those concepts. Salvation can be seen as nothing more than the escape from concepts. Salvation is now. I am the light of the world.
Beautiful to speak about the light of the world and being the light of the world. I think that's something that we like to make small when we use the ego. But being the light of the world isn't small. It's actually who we all are. And this equality is the power of it. And I think that's what A Course in Miracles is. One of the messages of A Course in Miracles is that we really are equal.
Well said. Beautiful words. There's something that in anticipation of this beautiful holy encounter, there's something that came to my mind. I forget what day it is now, maybe Saturday night. so much so that I had to jump up out of bed because I knew it was for our conversation. As I go scoot into the kitchen and pick up a pen and jot it down. And what came to me was, with the vision of the Holy Spirit, I look upon the belief in sickness and forgive it. With the vision of the Holy Spirit, I look upon the belief in sickness and forgive it. And this kind of formed, line after line, and then till in the end, the complete thing took shape, and I was like, oh, wow. I went and wrote it down, and then once I'd felt like, I wasn't going to forget it because it was on paper, then I felt like I could turn it over in my mind and look at the component parts. Whereas prior to documenting it and keeping it safe as such, if I'd have broken it down, I might have thought to myself that I wouldn't be able to remember the whole phrase by the time I woke up in the morning. And then I thought, the Holy Spirit. So it's perfect to bring this up because obviously it came, because of the name of your podcast. And we're so familiar with this phrase, the Holy Spirit, that we don't actually stop and go, hold on a minute, the Holy Spirit. So it's just the Spirit, but it's not spirit, it's holy, it's the Holy Spirit. And holiness, as we understand it from our journey with the Course, is just the holy instant, the holy relationship. It's a phrase that's needed in terms of a differentiation. If we are going to use, let's say, like special love, special relationship, the counterpoint being the holy relationship, the Holy Spirit, the holy instant. But if what is all-encompassing can have no opposite, and God is love and God is truth, holiness is a given. It's like everything's holy in that real state. So I thought the Holy Spirit, with the Holy Spirit's vision, I look upon. I thought, okay, how nice is that? I look upon. So that gives me the differentiation to say I'm not consumed by. I can't not see this because I'm completely and utterly enmeshed with it. But I look upon a belief in sickness. And then I thought, sickness, a belief in sickness. So then that doesn't pinpoint whether that sickness is in the thinking of my localized consciousness or somebody else that I know personally, or someone else that I brush up against in the world, or someone I see on television. It doesn't actually matter where the sickness is, how that sickness presents itself, essentially at its root of belief in separation. And forgive it. And having just spoken about forgiveness, as we know, within the context of how the Course teaches us about forgiveness. In answer to your very first question, how have you come to see the world the way that you do? Where I am today, 2 days ago, that came to my mind based almost as an anticipation of the question that once you said it, it came straight back to my memory because I've heard you say it to many of the guests that I've watched your episodes with. And there I was formulating the answer for you, for myself today, which is, with the vision of the Holy Spirit, I look upon the belief in sickness and forgive it.
That's really, really, really powerful to be able to do that. And I remember when I was being told from within that when being in this hospital room waiting to be looked at, it was saying like this is a really, really holy ground because so much forgiveness happens here. I was like, oh my, I'm under this pain, I'm under this horrible feeling and so on. And yet I'm being told that because of all the forgiveness that's happening in here from things that people were really angry about, unhappy about, and so on, it's holy ground.
Do you think we could share some silence?
Sure, we certainly can give some silence. So everyone who's listening, Leon, what would you like to share about silence so that people can enjoy this with us?
Wonderful question. Okay, so what I'm getting is the freedom in silence is its formlessness. And in its formlessness, there's no constraints. There's no limits to the extension and the expansion. The experience that we have in silence lifts us into the light. The light is our home. The light is where peace and happiness and love permeate the formlessness by simply being aspects of the one identity we share in the mind of God.
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, for joining everyone in spirit to choosing love, choosing to share, choosing to simply speak without hesitation. Thank you, Joel. Names that sound like first names. So thank you much for joining me on this podcast. Everyone for joining us. Bless you all. Please subscribe and review, share. And if you want a podcast, please connect with me. That blessings to you all, and next time.